If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, that means that you hate books. So I would consider maybe subscribing. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Theo. Thank you so much for choosing to hang out with me a little bit today. I just wanted to do my much delayed September and October combo monthly reading wrap up. The reason why this is a little bit delayed is because I've been a little bit busy, haven't really had time to sit down and record, but more importantly, I didn't read a whole lot in the last couple months. I've read a couple books in the month of September and of course in October. And so I thought I would just put them together and give you a little bit more of a robust wrap up than just, a couple books. So I have quite a few now because I'm doing 2 months altogether. And so let's just go ahead and get started. The first one you've probably seen me talk a little bit about in little snippets on different videos and stuff, but this one was picked by Alex at Tall Guy Reads as part of a September TBR swap. And it was Stephen King's 11/22/63. This one I think has become so far my favorite Stephen King book that I've read. This is a historical fiction, portal, speculative fiction, fantasy type story. And it's basically about a guy that goes back in time and, basically tries to stop the JFK assassination, but along the way, has his own life in the past and a couple different plot threads and stuff. And it's actually very interesting. So I won't get too much into it because that's really the heart of this book. That's really the plot. And it just takes an incredible journey, a lot of character development, very polished writing in this one. It's a little bit long in certain areas. I can understand people's criticisms for this one being a little bit chunky, maybe when it didn't really have to be, I think. My wife actually read this one alongside me. We did a buddy read for this. It was her first Stephen King book, and she quite liked it. I think I liked it more than she did. But I think I've just gotten used to King and enjoy King a little bit more. She actually liked this one so much that she picked up another book. And I don't think she's continued because she's actually very busy. She does full-time work. She's doing a full-time school program. She's very, very busy. So I think she picked up Billy Summers and then maybe didn't continue with that one and decided to switch to later, I believe. I'm not sure, but I'll ask her. But we were actually going to I put up a poll on the channel not that long ago asking if you guys wanted reviews for certain books. And the two that were tied with quite a few votes, I think over 120 people voted. This was one, and the other was Swan Song by Robert McCammon. So I would love to do reviews for both of those. And I think my wife and I are going to do something special and do kind of a joint review on this. Get two contrasting opinions, not overly contrasting. She very much liked it. I liked it more. And so I think we're going to do a joint review on this one and talk about different things we liked, different areas that, we maybe didn't see eye to eye on and stuff. So that'll be very interesting. So this one was great. I think I gave this one a 4 out of 5 star. It was quite a beefy book. Took up, a portion of my reading in September because it is quite thick. But I really enjoyed it. I had a blast. I thank Alex for picking it for me because I was meaning to read it for very long. And I'm glad I got to it a little bit sooner than I otherwise would have. So that one kind of kicked off September and I really enjoyed it. The next one was I've also talked a little bit about, and it was picked by Baron as part of that TBR swap. And this one is Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. Now, this one is kind of interesting. A lot of people were joking that, it's a tough book. It's a tough book. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people love it. You either love McCarthy or you don't. And if you do like McCarthy, you think he's a genius and probably one of the best authors of our time. I think it's a little bit too early for me to kind of pick a camp. I can see that it is a very important piece of literature. It was beautiful. It was interesting, but it's very difficult to read both in content and just the way that it's written. So I can see it not working for a lot of people, but I actually had a pretty good time with it. I was really worried about this one. It's one of the most violent, descriptive, difficult to read, not challenging, but just tough subject matter. This talks about the American West in the 1850s and the Native American conflict on the kind of Mexican-American border and that whole tragic kind of history. I won't go too much into it, but that's basically what it's about. And it's very gruesome. It's very violent. It's very descriptive. Now, the writing is extremely poetic and there's not a whole lot of punctuation. He gets a lot of flack for that. He writes without punctuation and without quotations and things like that. And it's very challenging for someone who reads normal books, I guess, to go and read something like this. But I know a lot of people that, Cormac McCarthy is one of their favorite authors, if not their favorite author of all time. So there's obviously a lot of merit to his work. And if you dig it, like if you get it, then you love it. But for a lot of people, it's going to be difficult to get into. I probably wouldn't start with this book by Cormac McCarthy. I'm told that this probably isn't the best place to start, but it is a challenging book. And Barron gave it to me sort of as something unique, something to get me out of my comfort zone, and also to experiment and try a new author. So I was grateful for that. I enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. There are some characters in this book, a villain in particular, some scenes in particular that are going to stay with me for quite some time, and I think have like a lasting impact. And that says a lot for a book to have that kind of, lasting impression. So the writing was incredible. Like I said, it was poetic. I listened to, I would say half of it. I would say, 2/3 of it on audio. And I think that helped a lot with my enjoyment and my introduction to Cormac McCarthy, because the lack of punctuation and quotations and all this stuff didn't really matter a whole lot. It read very fluid, and the narrator was excellent. I can't remember off the top of my head who it was, but it was a very, very good audiobook. So if you're going to try this, if you're going to read Cormac McCarthy for the first time, or this book for the first time, try the audio if you have it. Again, it's probably the most violent book I've ever read. It has imagery that's going to stay with you. I didn't end up rating this one on Goodreads. I didn't think I could do it justice. It's a very unique reading experience. I throw out ratings when I can, but in very, unique circumstances, it just doesn't make sense. And this was one of them. I can see the reasons for rereadability on this book. Like, I can see people rereading this one and picking it apart and studying it, all the themes, certain references, the allegory sometimes in some of the scenes. And I can totally get it. And so for that reason, I think a lot of people would get something completely different out of this book, if you were to compare a bunch of different readers. So I didn't rate this one. I didn't think I needed to. I didn't think it was that important. I did do a little bit of a review that I kind of summarized here. And overall, I enjoyed it. And I would recommend, giving it a shot. But again, I would do some research and maybe not start with this book with Cormac McCarthy. But if you've read Cormac McCarthy, the next one I'm going to read, for example, is The Road. If you're curious about this book and you didn't completely hate his writing style and you don't think that this guy is like the worst author in the world, then go ahead and pick this one up and give yourself a bit of a challenge and a unique reading experience. Also in the month of September, as part of our Sun Eater channel read along on the Discord, at the Grimoire Discord, I read Demon in White by Christopher Ruocchio. And I also read I think it comes before this one. Yes, it comes after Howling Dark and before this one, I'm pretty sure. And that is Queen Amid Ashes. That's like a little novella. And the novella it follows Hadrian, and it takes place on kind of a cool little side mission to this other planet. He finds out what's happening to this population. They're under attack or have been attacked recently, and they're all kind of just surviving and trying to get through this whole thing. And he discovers that things aren't exactly what they appear to be. And it's kind of an interesting look at humanity and human reaction to like very dire circumstances. So I won't say much more than that. It was really cool to follow Hadrian off-world, kind of onto a different planet, following a different group on this little mission. And it was a cool little story. I really enjoyed it. It just added to the whole Sun Eater universe that I've been enjoying quite a bit. And so after that, I got into Demon in White, and this was a blast. This was everything I wanted in a Sun Eater book. So it had a lot more of the travel. It had a lot more of the combat. It had a lot more relationships. I shouldn't say more. It just had a lot of that stuff in the series that I really liked. It packed it all into this book. It really cranked everything up to 11. Like, it was such a cool book. A lot happens in this book, and there's everything I wanted. There were some characters that I really wanted to see. There were some relationships I wanted to see continue to develop. The writing was polished and beautiful and poetic as usual. The pacing was excellent. Tons of action. We get to travel to really cool places. We got to see a lot more of kind of the sexy space stuff. And I won't talk too much about what this book is about because it'll spoil possibly the beginning, few books. But yeah, a lot happens in this book. It was a really good time. And we get a lot more backstory and a lot more kind of information that fills in the gap between kind of old Earth and what happened to get us to this future state and how things have evolved. The throwbacks to like history, like modern history and stuff is actually pretty interesting. So the backstory you get in this really starts to flesh things out and give it a little bit more color to the world. And I loved it. Like I said, this book was a 5-star read for me. I loved it, and it had everything that I wanted in the next Sun Eater book. It just delivered on it. So I loved it. Christopher Ruocchio continues to be very impressive, and I can't wait. I'm currently reading Kingdoms of Death. Hope to finish that very, very soon. In fact, I'll be reading it after I record this video. So if you haven't started the Sun Eater series with the Empire of Silence, that's the first book, check it out. I have a review. I have a pretty good review, I think. I was pretty proud of that one. Go ahead and check that out and get a feel for maybe what this series is about and what you can expect from it. So I would recommend it. Demon in White was excellent. The book that was chosen for me in September that I didn't have a chance to get to is The Fifth Season. Now, I am going to be reading this as soon as I finish Kingdoms of Death, probably in the next day. So this is going to be next up. Guaranteed I'll be reading it very soon. I've actually already started reading it. I'm like 2 chapters in, but I put it down to prioritize Kingdoms of Death because there is a discussion happening that I want to try and be part of later this week. So eventually I'll get to this one. People are trolling me in the Discord, making sure that I read this soon because I've been, I don't know. I just didn't get to it. I'm sorry. What can I say? So that one's coming up, and that's the only one in September that I should have read that I just didn't. That basically wraps up September, and then we go into our October Halloweeny, spooky, whatever horror season reads. And I had a pretty good October, definitely quality over quantity. But let's go ahead and get into October. The first one that I read in October with some patrons and other subscribers and a couple other people on the Discord was The Exorcist by Will and Peter Blatty. This one was written in 1971 and is basically now, I would consider, a classic of the horror genre. And obviously there's the famous movie. I'm hoping to watch the movie with a couple patrons. We're going to do a movie night on the Discord, watch it together and chat through it now that we've all read the book and compare. I think that's going to be really fun. So I'm very excited for that. But the book was brilliant, and I can see why people love it and why it's really, considered a classic, if not already will be in the genre. The writing was actually very good, but I will say the prologue was it was kind of a miss for me. There's a short prologue at the beginning that kind of sets up. It's a bit of a throwback and takes you to a different place. And it was just a little bit jarring for me. And by the end of the story, or even, throughout, you can kind of understand why and, why this was done. But the way that it was done just felt a little bit out of place, and I didn't really like it. And I wasn't sure how this book was going to go for me because I wasn't sure about the writing at first. Like I said, the prologue it's a little bit jarring and you feel a little bit lost, but then you get thrown into the actual story and you kind of make the connection between the prologue, as is the case usually between the prologue and then what you're reading now. It kind of makes sense, but it didn't really make sense for a while. And I thought it could have been probably done a little bit smoother. It was a very tense book. It was a very suspenseful, there was a sense of dread during the whole thing. And, you just want to know what's going to happen. And you're always wondering about these characters when they're off page and stuff. So the characters were very memorable. There were a couple that I really, really liked, some that were just whatever, but for the most part, the characters were actually very well done and quite memorable. The book was quite graphic at times. I think parents with young children might find parts of it a little bit difficult. If you've ever watched the movie, you can probably understand what I'm talking about, particularly parents with daughters. Some of it was a little hard to digest, but for a horror book, for something that's meant to push the boundaries as it did back in the 70s and even really comparatively now, it does what it does pretty well. Overall, it was a great Halloween book. I'm really glad I finally read it. It was a 4 out of 5. And me and the crew that read it all together had a blast. And I'm looking forward to the movie. The next one I read in October, I read alongside my friend Chaz over at Bookish Chaz. I'll link his channel in the description. But we read Frankenstein together. We read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This was I did it on audio. I have the free audio that was narrated by Dan Stevens that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And I believe it is the revised 1831 text. I think if you ever see a book or an audiobook that doesn't specifically specify that it's the original 1818 text, it is usually the revised 1831 text, where a character, Elizabeth, is instead of a lover, it's a cousin, or the other way around. I can't remember, but the change is quite minimal. And the rest of it is pretty much the same. So not to worry, you're going to get pretty much the same story if you read either one. But the Dan Stevens narration on Audible is actually free. At least it was in Canada. I think it is in the States too. Go ahead and check that out if you haven't. It's a brilliant book, a very tragic, emotional, just kind of heart-wrenching like story, to be honest. It's completely different than the pop culture stuff you might have in your head, different than the movie. The writing was beautiful and fluid and almost poetic. It's written so well. And when you think that Mary Shelley was 19 years old when she wrote this, I mean, it's very impressive. Arguably, this is like one of the first science fiction fantasy type books ever written. And it is, I mean, I can understand why it's had such an impact on pop culture and the genre and all that type of stuff. I mean, it's just a beautifully written book. It's, like I said, it's completely different than what you might expect. But when you check your expectations and you know that this is a character driven, emotional like story, you know, it's not really about the science and the monster and all that stuff. It's really about humanity and the themes of humanity and existence and what it means to be human, and even the pursuit of progress and like, you know, achievement and relationships and how important that is. So yeah, this one was a very interesting book. It was great. I would recommend it. If you haven't already, I would check it out. There's a beautiful monologue kind of in the middle of the book that is, and this isn't really spoilers. It's the bulk of it is, like I said, the character study of both the monster and also Dr. Frankenstein. But there's a monologue at the middle where it's the monster speaking, and it talks about how it got to from where it awakened to basically where we are in the story now, and the things that it learned along the way, and, you know, how it became resourceful and figured things out, and what it wanted, what its desires were, how it perceived the world and the people that it encountered, and in return, how the world and outside world and people perceived it and its feelings about that and stuff, and how that affected it. So very interesting book, very well done, impressive writing, a beautiful story, and a free audiobook if you can find it. So I gave that, I think, a 4 out of 5, and I really enjoyed it. Also in the month of October, I started reading what I think is going to be my book of the year. It might be a little too early to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. I started reading Stephen King's It, and I'm 50% into it, and I've put it down because I'm prioritizing some other books for November. And as soon as I have time, I'm going to get back to this one, but I'm not going to talk about it too much here because I'm going to include it on my next wrap up, but I'm loving it. All I want to do is read this book. You guys have heard me talk about it in my last video. I'm really enjoying it. Character work is exceptional. The time jumping back and forth works. The characters are unique and fleshed out, well developed, very interesting. I care about all these people and what happens. I like being back in the town of Derry. Everything about this book so far has worked for me. So if it continues this way, it's going to be, like I said, a contender for book of the year, at least. Definitely a contender. Finally, I read in October, The Troop by Nick Cutter. I didn't read a whole lot in October, just a couple books, and it took me a while to get through everything, but I really like this one. It was a good Halloween, spooky, kind of gross horror book. It has a blurb by Stephen King on it, and I got early Stephen King vibes from the writing, to be honest. It's about a group of Boy Scouts and their, camp leader, whatever, go on this camp overnight trip on this, island on the east coast of Canada. And I think it's Prince Edward Island. Something or someone comes along into the camp and things take a turn for the worse. It becomes pretty hectic and it becomes a story of survival. There exist multiple threats to their survival, including, but not limited to, each other. And that's a very interesting exploration of how people can change when circumstances change, and sort of the evil within each of us that can sometimes be lurking in people that you wouldn't expect it to be. Some of the backstory is provided by like news articles and interviews from certain people. I won't spoil it very much, but yeah, I thought that was actually well done. And that was a very interesting way to bring in some of the backstory and reconcile kind of what's happening now with like how this whole thing began and what led to the events that transpire on this island. It can be very descriptive at times. For a lot of people, that's going to work well if you're wanting or expecting that from your book, but there's a lot of gross elements. There's body horror. There's just, there's no fading to black. He explains and describes everything, the sounds, the smells, the feeling, the textures, the like what's happening. And it can get pretty gross. So if you like that type of stuff, you're in for a treat. If you don't, if you're squeamish, maybe avoid this one. But for Halloween and like the spooky type vibe, it does that pretty well on this dark, kind of rainy, stormy island setting. For the most part, it was actually pretty good for that. There is one part in particular that I had to skip, and it gives you a little bit of warning, like it gives you some time to skip that part so you won't be caught off guard. But there is a little bit of animal abuse somewhere in the middle of the story. And for me personally, I couldn't deal with that particular scene, so I just skipped that one. So there's a trigger warning for you if that's something that really bothers you. You can skip it, so I don't know if I would necessarily say that you have to completely pass on this book. If you're interested and this is a book that you think you would like, there's a scene in it that you could skip, not to worry. But yeah, otherwise, I had a great time. It did exactly what I wanted it to. I gave it a 3.5 stars out of 5. I thought that it lingered a little bit in certain areas. I thought that it could have probably moved along a little bit. It wasn't a very long book overall. So, to shorten it even more, I don't know how that would have played out. I think maybe like the characters were fairly fleshed out. Each of the kids were very, fairly unique. They all have their own things. So they are very unique characters. And for the most part, they were fleshed out. But it lingered in certain areas for too long versus continuing on with the parts of the story that I enjoyed more. So that's why I give it a 3.5. It could have been a 4, it could have been a 3, depending on the day. So 3.5 is where I landed. I enjoyed it. If you like something gross, disgusting, descriptive, horror, spooky, suspenseful type of story, go ahead and check this one out. So that's basically what I read in September and October, guys. A lot of quality versus quantity. I had a really good time reading these ones. And I hope to continue enjoying books for the rest of the month now. Curious what you guys are reading. If you've read any of these, go ahead as usual, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. And that's it for me. I will catch you guys real soon on the next one.